So as promised, the Florida Maquis here at Patreon is going to pivot, not necessarily away from the psychological operations training, because we are continuing to do that over at the YouTube channel membership side. But here, primarily, we are going to talk about states' rights and why dividing back into 50 independent nations not only is our solution, but was the original intention of the Founding Fathers. They knew that being ruled, even as only 13, by one location was destined to fail. And we've seen what's happened when every 4 years or every 8 years we lurch from the left, lurch to the right, trying to find one individual who has never made a mistake in his life, who has never done anything controversial in his life, to step in and for 8 years somehow pretend to be a leader or somehow make believe that they're going to have a change, when we're a country that is so incredibly diverse and so incredibly different from coast to coast, north to south, that it's an impossible task. It was never meant to be. In order to do this intelligently and properly, we have to start with some education. We started here, and this was the original map that I put up when I started talking about this. The GDPs of the 50 United States are on par with major countries around the world. Even in our Constitution, and you can look this up, there is no provision for a national election for president. All they do is have 50 state elections, and by the way, those state elections aren't even required by the Constitution. Did you realize that your state can just pick electors however it wants to? It doesn't even need to ascertain whether your state wants this person or wants that person from the RNC or the DNC. Not required. All they have to do is determine a number of electors equal to the representation at the House, and then send them. And then those electors can vote for whoever the hell they want to. That policy should tell you volumes about what the intentions of the Founding Fathers were for Washington, D.C. They knew very well that the idea that even with 13 colonies, that many people getting together and all agreeing on one or two people was going to be impossible. So they would decide for themselves. That's why they made Washington, D.C. of almost none effect and gave the states their own power. That's why the Second Amendment says for the security of a free state being necessary. Not a free person, not a free individual, not a free nation. It says the security of a free state. And what we're going to really focus on here today is the reason there is no solution in Washington, D.C. It's been taken over by two criminal committees, the DNC and the RNC, that parade themselves around as political parties. Most don't know that they used to be one party, and that's what you're looking at in front of you right here, the Democratic Republican Party. And ironically, they were stood up to oppose the very thing that they have become. I'm going to read this real quick for you. The Democratic Republican Party, formerly called the quote-unquote Republican Party, was an American political party formed by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison around 1792 to oppose the centralizing policies of the new Federalist Party run by Alexander Hamilton, who was ironically the Secretary of the Treasury and chief architect of George Washington's administration. From 1801 to 1825, the new party controlled the presidency and the Congress, as well as most states during the first party system. It began in 1791 as one faction in Congress and included many politicians who had been opposed to the new Constitution. They called themselves Republicans after their political philosophy, republicanism. They distrusted the Federalist tendency to centralize and loosely interpret the Constitution, just like we have now, believing these policies were signs of monarchism and anti-republican values. Absolutely correct. The party splintered in 1824, with the faction loyal to Andrew Jackson coalescing into the Jacksonian movement, later known as the Democratic Party, and the faction led by John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay forming the National Republican Party. Now, I'll go ahead and give you the link to this. This is the wiki for this, but understand, they were one group of people. that got infiltrated and realized, oh my gosh, we can run things ourselves. And they have turned into the very thing they were originally founded to oppose. There are more of us than there are of them. There's two fundamental lies that, and they're psychological operation driven lies, that if you're going to understand this and be able to argue about it articulately, you have to be able to understand. Lie number one is that there are only two ideas. Idea Republican, idea Democrat. No third ideas. And any third idea would have to, this is the second fallacy, would have to rule all 50 states. See, this is the trap they get people in. Well, if you're not going to vote Democrat or Republican, what's your big idea to rule everybody? My big idea is to not rule everybody. My big idea, the reason I wanted Gary Johnson, was because Gary Johnson, regardless of what his opinion is on anything, would be the first person to tell you that his opinion would always be secondary to the opinions of the states. That's why he said the first thing that he would do is begin dismantling the federal government. Any person who came with any idea to dismantle any federal agency, he would sign on to it, no matter what it was. The idea is divesting power away from DC and stop thinking that there's just two choices. Or even stop really thinking that there's just three or just four. That's the most infuriating thing about trying to speak to people about this, is because they are so brain-numbed and brainwashed to think that, well, if it's not the R and it's not the D, then there must be some third thing, and how are they going to, what kind of a tyrant are they going to be? We don't need to have a tyrant. We don't need to have DC telling us. Patriotism doesn't mean answering to DC. Patriotism doesn't mean that you just automatically defer Washington, D.C. all the power over your life. It's arrogance and hubris that they even do this every year. They say, okay, which half of the states are we going to have, and what half of the states are they going to have? It's horrible. And to anybody who doesn't live here and live in our nation, they look at us like we're crazy, and I don't blame them. We are. Because what have they really done? They have ruled money equals speech. The vast majority of this country doesn't believe that abortion should be legal, yet it is. I could go right down the list. No one in this country would pay taxes unless there wasn't a gun at their head. And they take our money and finance agencies that they arm like militaries to make sure we pay that money. Who is living under a dictator? Who is really living under a dictatorship? And they use fear psyops every 4 years. Oh gosh, we can't have any new ideas. And I love how, and the Democratic Party has tried to subsume this. There was a beginning of it with the Tea Party with the Republicans, but really they call themselves the Big Tent Party, that all new ideas must attach a D to the end of its name, which means it's no longer a new idea. That the Tea Party just rolled over, and if there's anybody out there within the sound of my voice who ever participated in the Tea Party, do you realize that the guy you more than likely voted for in the last election cycle was giving money to Rahm Emanuel while you were part of the Tea Party in 2010? This map shows, which one is this? Okay, this is what the country would look like if we divvied everything up according to population, where all of these areas had the same amount of people. This is how you would have to break everything up. And there would be no problem with this. There would be absolutely no problem with this. And for anyone who's out there saying, well, Russia will run in, take over, and so will China. Why haven't they done that in South America? Why haven't they done that in Africa? Why haven't they done that in Europe? South America is a continent, has a dozen or so countries down there. Nobody's run in and taken them over. In fact, the only thing they've really had to fear is us. Same thing with Africa. If there was ever any continent that could have gotten taken over just because they're a bunch of individual countries, it would have been them. They were poor, they were uneducated, They had very little military, but yet here they are. Nobody's bothered to do, because it's this boogeyman crap put out by DC that makes us feel like, we would be vulnerable. We'd be vulnerable to DC if we left them with any amount of power. And if you don't believe, this is an amazing thing I found, Prison Policy Initiative. This is world incarceration rates if every U.S. state and territory were a country. Number 1 on the list would be the District of Columbia, with an incarceration rate of 1,196 per, I'm not sure what the metric is here, but they are number 1 on the list. And the funny thing is, if you go to the 2018 version, they don't even list the District of Columbia. So whoever was putting this map together realized the oopsie-daisy in revealing the real truth. This map is based on, these are the states as they set now, square footage, square miles wise. And these are countries that are equivalent square miles. This doesn't have to do with money. This just has to do with land territory. So to give you an idea of the space, for example, Alabama and Greece have about the same square miles. Florida and Suriname, Kentucky and Iceland. This one, if you're ever worried about protecting yourself, state to country gun ownership comparisons. Alabama has about the same amount of guns as Spain. Arkansas has about the same amount of guns as Greece. California has more guns than China. Florida has more guns than Mexico. Idaho more than Norway. And you can go down the list. We are wealthy. We are armed. We are intelligent. We are educated. We are diverse. This wouldn't be a problem. The biggest thing standing in our way right now is Washington, D.C. Specifically, these two parties, these two criminal organizations that are so steeped in psychological operations, controlling the media, controlling the horizontal, controlling the vertical, controlling everything you think, see, hear, and believe about politics. No third ideas, no fourth ideas, no seventh ideas. This might have been the most terrifying statement of all. And I just had 2 people here at Patreon say they were leaving because they believed this. That without this label of the Union, the USA, that we are no longer worthy of anything. We didn't have men fight and die for a label. They fought and died for our freedom, and getting rid of DC, whether we would call it the United States of America or the new free republic of North America, if men and women were free, truly free, it wouldn't matter what the name was. And governing ourselves independently and reducing DC to simple administrative duties, that's the key. People know this and people talk about this. But when it comes down to every year when the elections happen, they turn it into a sports contest. They treat it like the Super Bowl, like March Madness. I needed to lay this groundwork in this first video. We're going to talk about each state. This isn't something new. This is something that people have talked about for a long time, but the vast majority of people talking about it have done so with the intention of installing their own version of a tyrant. Another party in DC. DC was a creation, has been a creation of these two parties. That it has risen in the amount of power it has over our daily lives is a direct result of this one party masquerading itself as two. And when we get rid of them, when we get rid of the power, see what happens See how many people stop wanting to be in politics when it's no longer something that is a cash cow, when you don't get to write books about it, when you don't make millions and millions and millions of dollars. Nobody's going to want to go there. And all these people you see as wanting to serve and wanting to change. You take away those big fat paychecks, you watch how fast they're back in the market and not serving. This is what the channel is going to be about. This is what we're going to talk about over here. This is why we're also going to talk about Venezuela and how their different idea of things has completely thrown most Americans for a loop who have come to wake up about it. The reason they're failing is because they don't understand what happens when the people stand up and actually take power over their country. It doesn't matter who their leaders are. Nicolas Maduro is rope-a-doping the government in D.C. like a master because he realizes it's not about him. It was never about him. Chavez even knew it wasn't about him. It was about an idea. You guys have a great night.